So before everything, I just want to give a quick introduction about Andreas and Jungwon. So Andreas and Jungwon are both co-founders of Ought. Andreas was here with us at MIT. He did his PhD in Josh Tenenbaum's lab in cognitive science and worked on models of concept learning implemented as probabilistic programs. Then he did his postdoc at Stanford, where he created WebPPL, a new programming language for probabilistic machine learning. Jungwon is also a co-founder of Ought and also a COO of Ought. Jungwon was the head of growth at Upstart, a fintech company using machine learning for credit. And also before Upstart, she was a management consultant at Oliver Wyman. Ought, their startup, is a machine learning research lab automating scaling open-ended reasoning. And they're building Elicit, an AI research assistant using language models to amplify researchers in both academia and policy. So I want to give them the opportunity to tell you more about Elicit, but quick fun fact, I'm so glad that I was given the opportunity to play with it beforehand. So some of the questions for this conversation have been brainstormed with it, and I'm going to give Elicit credit when I'm calling on the questions that it suggested. So yeah, so before further ado, I want to hand it to Andreas and Jungwon. So maybe before everything, do you want to tell us a bit more about yourself and how did you end up, here today?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, as you mentioned before, I've mainly been in academia, and I substantially blame MIT for ending up where I ended up because I did my undergrad in cognitive science in Germany, and then I just wanted to do a semester abroad at MIT, and then it turned into a year abroad, and then it turned into a PhD. So I kind of got stuck there and never went back. I've always been interested in how can you make reasoning better and how can we use machine learning to support reasoning, and like initially studied that in academia, and then over time thought that probably the best way to do that is to start a new like kind of nonprofit research lab, which is Ought.
Awesome. How about you, Jungwon?
Yes, my background was mostly in finance before, but while I was at Upstart and even at Oliver Wyman, ended up doing a lot of work that was kind of at the intersection of qualitative and quantitative reasoning, doing a lot of forecasting, making decisions under uncertainty, trying to reason about incomplete data. And when I decided that I wanted to go start my own company, one of the ideas that kind of sat with me for a really long time was figuring out how these AI systems could help people organize the thoughts in their minds. And I actually was originally interested in kind of a more mental health application of AI. It seemed like, stress and anxiety are these very opaque, large, kind of hard to pin down experiences that people have. A lot of kind of mental health practices are around breaking those down into causes or potential interventions. And decisions that are a little bit more manageable. I thought that decomposition, if it could be AI supported, would be really helpful for the world and for a lot of people. And then I met Andreas, who was similarly interested in breaking down this more open-ended, complex reasoning. And since then, Ought has kind of evolved in a few different ways, but that core mission of trying to understand how do people reason through their lives, their decisions, their emotional states, make complex decisions. How can we break that down into pieces that are smaller and therefore more amenable to automation? As AI gets more and more advanced, how can we ensure that it is helpful for these more qualitative and open-ended questions, much as it's been demonstrated to be helpful for more quantitative or numerical questions? So that core theme has always been there. And then now we're working on Elicit, which kind of studies the research process and some of the more qualitative reasoning that happens in research and tries to think about how AI can support that.
Wow, that's so awesome. Yeah, so maybe for the people who haven't seen your platform, do you want to walk us through the magic that happens in the background? It's actually one question that was suggested by Elicit.
Yeah, that sounds great. Let's see, it's sometimes magical and sometimes nuts, but we're all kind of exploring this new technology together. I'll start by describing one of the research processes that we're studying. So Elicit is an AI research assistant, like Asma said. We're using language models to kind of amplify the work that researchers are doing. Every year, the number of publications that are on arXiv is growing exponentially. There's so much research debt. It's very hard for researchers to keep up with all of the publications that are being released. So we're trying to figure out how we can take some of the work that might be more automatable or find opportunities where researchers might benefit from automation and start to use these AI systems towards that goal. We've been, over the past 5 to 8 months, we've been working pretty closely with analysts at think tank, different researchers, and just trying to observe their workflows and find things that are shared or redundant across researchers. And this is one abstraction of a research process that we identified. Hopefully it'll seem pretty familiar to you. It's by far, it's very far from being the perfect research process. It's definitely not the only one, but we find that often the research project kind of starts with a question. This question changes over the course of the research project, sometimes too late. For the policy analysts that we're supporting, it can come from policymakers and is sometimes vague or underdefined. It'll be a question like, who's going to win the AI war, which is just like a very difficult question to define and requires a lot of scoping. So there's a really important part of the research process that is just figuring out what is the question that you're trying to answer. Then researchers will go through a process of trying to understand the landscape. So what has already been said? What are the primary conversations? What is unknown? What are some of the core disagreements? This is basically the lit review process or part of a research project. A lot of Googling, Google Scholar, pursuing dead ends, thinking about search terms. And then once the researcher has gotten a sense of what is happening in this space, then they start to bring their own thoughts and ideas and think about how they can contribute to the conversation. This step 4 is varies from project to project, but there's usually a process of acquiring and analyzing maybe evidence more broadly than data. So once I have some framework of how the space works, a map or like a structure of an argument, how do I falsify or validate some of the hypotheses that I have? And then of course there's a process of writing up the results. So again, each step is not so discrete. There's a lot of iteration. Sometimes a researcher will start from data and figure out what does the data tell us? What questions could we answer? Sometimes they already have a lot of expertise and don't need to understand the landscape in kind of an explicit way. But for a lot of researchers, hopefully this is a familiar process, even if each step is kind of done in different sequences. And then so the way Elicit works is we create individual tasks that can support the researcher at every step. There's a lot of there are brainstorming tasks, there are search tasks. We also now have classification tasks. All of this is currently using GPT-3, which is like one of the most exciting things about this technology and using language models is that this one general purpose reasoning tool can do so many different things. So it can help, we'll see how it helps researchers kind of define the research question and helps them make them more specific. There are ways to use language models to do better search. We're also working on classification. So I'll kind of show that, but at a high level, like all of these are different tasks are based off of GPT-3. And it's just pretty crazy that now so much of a researcher's workflow can live in the same product and be driven by the same technology. So that's how it works. And so we use that kind of research process as a high level framework for structuring our work so that we can think, we can experiment very quickly and give researchers basically a toolkit where each task is a tool that they can pick up if it's helpful. And we can really experiment quickly and get feedback on what's actually useful or not. And so I'll show just like a couple of the tasks and how they work. So I'll start with brainstorming research questions. And here I noticed that one of the past talks was around designing artificial intelligence to promote cooperation. So like if I imagine that that's the research project that I'm working on, artificial intelligence cooperation, it's hard to talk and type at the same time. This task is basically used to help a researcher go from a little bit more of a vague topic or research direction and then break that down and think about what are adjacent questions, what are more specific versions of the question, what are some questions that I might want to answer in my research report. And so this is the results here now are all generated by GPT-3. So these are different questions a researcher can think about. What are the theoretical foundations of human cooperation? What is deep learning? Maybe like a little bit too far back so we can get rid of the results that are not helpful. Does computational narrative modeling accurately predict human behavior during war and negotiation? That was like crazy specific. I actually Googled this earlier because I was like, what is this? And sometimes GPT-3 will suggest things that don't make sense, but it actually seems like maybe MIT has done some work on computational models of narrative. Maybe there's some relevance there. What role does intelligence play in our moral intuition? What is AI safety? What is the correlation between communication type and cooperation? What are the foundations of reciprocity? What are the problems of humans versus machines in competition? We built Elicit in such a way that the researcher can give feedback to the model and get into this kind of flow of brainstorming. So if I like I got rid of one of the results, if I like the rest of the results, I can star them and then I can start to add my own. And then the kind of bounds between my thoughts and GPT-3's thoughts start to blur. So maybe I want to ask something like, what are ways that machines are demonstrate, I don't know, cooperative behavior today or something like that. And then if I click show more like starred, it will learn from this and generate more like all of the different results that I've starred and kind of move away from the results that I didn't star. Can game theory be applied to make more informed AI safety decisions, etc.? There are different versions of this task. So like help me be more specific is more conversational. So it'll point out the ways that the research question might be underdefined. So what is meant by AI promoting cooperation? Do you mean designing AI to modify behavior of human beings? Are you talking about including governing AI? What is meant by designing? How is it different from constructing? When you say cooperation, how will the AI be measuring and promoting cooperation? So these are basically like probably questions your advisor would ask you, but you can kind of anticipate that and prepare for that meeting, have some thoughts in advance. What does artificial intelligence mean? Great question. And another way researchers can use this is to manage the scope of their project. Scope creep is something that researchers say is really difficult. This allows researchers to be like, okay, what am I really talking about when I say artificial intelligence? Do I want to define that a little bit more precisely? In the interest of, there's a lot that I could show. In the interest of time, I'll just show one more task that's a little bit different. And this is like the focus of what we're doing now. We have a task called auto tagging a spreadsheet. So I actually used Elicit to brainstorm a bunch of people to invite to this seminar and included some of the people that I think were already here who were invited in the past. And then I Googled them and tagged them by different kind of domains, just very, very roughly. It's not perfect. I'll just do it just to kind of show you how this tag works. And from here, we now use the same brainstorming or generative capabilities that I just showed you to complete the rest of the rows that I did not fill out. So I'm just going to select my spreadsheet and then, let me just make sure this is right. Maybe I picked the wrong. Let me see if it's this one. Right, so now it's created a new tab. Let me move my Zoom screen here. And it has completed the rest of the tags and given a confidence for each of them. Some of these, it's labeled as 0, so those are probably wrong. I need to do a little bit of iteration with this. But different researchers have found it helpful to do a very quick pass over annotating a spreadsheet and maybe sort by probability of it being AI and then kind of like organize their work that way, or have a third perspective, like an automated perspective on some work where they're doing a lot of human annotation. There's definitely like human annotation seems to be a very, very intensive and commonly encountered like project for a lot of researchers. So we're hoping to support them with that. So there's, I would be very excited to show a lot more, but that's just a sneak peek of what Elicit is. Oh, actually, I should show one more thing, sorry, because I know the group is really interested in this. This was the task that actually connected us to Asma in the first place. This task takes a critical statement and then reframes it into a positive statement. So like if I say something like my research is doomed, then GPT-3 is now going to help me take a more positive outlook on the state of my research. I've already made some pretty huge steps in my research and there's always opportunities to make more progress. I don't understand this new research area that well yet. I'm going to find people who are good at it to be my advisors, so on and so forth. So you could put the critical feedback you're getting from your advisor here and then reframe it to yourself more positively so that you don't get discouraged in your research. Those are some of the things that Elicit is capable of today.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Jungwon. Actually, I have to say, I need that for my everyday, every morning kind of give me some positive boost and then go through my day. That's awesome. I think there's a lot of also like technical questions we can talk about, like, use of generative models for classification, but I'm gonna, keep it kind of more high level at this point and let you tell us a bit more about, one of the things that I heard in some of your previous interviews was the concept of using personalized Wikipedia. Do you wanna talk more about that, of how Elicit can be used for that?
Yeah, Andres, do you wanna answer that question?
I think I'll let you take it.
Okay, yeah. So I'm not sure if we like referenced it that specifically, but in general, we're excited for Elicit to be highly customized to the researcher, and I think it'll be broader than Wikipedia. So it's actually quite easy to create your own search tasks and use GPT-3 for to do semantic search over like your bib file or all of the PDFs that people have. I met a researcher who has like this crazy folder system of like hundreds and hundreds of folders and so many publications. Kind of in each folder that seems impossible for anyone else to navigate. If we could just more easily enable a flexible semantic search over that, that might help them discover, not just what publication was relevant, but which part of which publication was relevant. And then I think even more broadly than some of the search capabilities, where it's very easy to create a new task in Elicit. So this, maybe you don't need a positive reframe task. Maybe you need like an angry critical parent task. And so each researcher can kind of build the task, build their own assistant or like chatbot or conversational bot to help them think through some of the questions in the style that makes sense. We're quite excited for that level of personalization.
So one example of that is I wanted semantic search for all the kind of papers or like for the bibliography that I accumulated over the many years of being an academic, which is like a couple of thousand papers. And so, so I just like exported basically the bib.txt file from my like reference manager and made a new search task on Elicit, which is pretty quick. And it's nice. Now I can search for things like, I don't know, Media Lab, and then it'll show me papers that are related to that topic.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's so cool. Yeah. But, I think there is something else that, maybe people might miss. And that's the fact that, you're not just using GPT-3 or, for that matter, like any other language model, like from Hugging Face type of models or anything. But I think it's your platform really allows for kind of more interesting a way of like recursive question asking or kind of help humans become more thoughtful researchers overall, which is a lot more than just a UI around GPT-3. I think Jungwon talked about that a little bit, but I was wondering if you want to add anything more or explain more about some of the nuances of that.
Yeah, this is still something that we're kind of in the process of getting to, but our basic approach is we want to understand what are kind of good Lego blocks of thinking, if you like. And like Jungwon demonstrated some of those blocks. Like maybe one block is, I have a bunch of examples of, say, AI professors that want to brainstorm more like this. So brainstorm more like this is maybe one block you could think about. And then another block that Jungwon demonstrated is like classification. Like, I'm going to look at some of them and I'm going to say, this one is relevant to my interests. This one is not. That's another block. And so really the place we want to get to is make those individual blocks robust enough so that you can compose them together. So they can be like, okay, now I have these units of thinking, if you like, and I can say, okay, I'm going to brainstorm a bunch of things, and then I'm going to like compose it together with classification, and so like throw out all the professors that are not relevant to my interests.
I can quickly show what that looks like, if that makes it a little more concrete.
Okay,
so
cool.
Like, I did this. So I can brainstorm more like this is like a generic brainstorming task. The user gives an example of a category and some examples, and we just like keep learning that sequence. So let's say I want to brainstorm a bunch of people to invite to MIT Media Labs, Media Arts and Sciences student seminar. Usually I give a few examples, but I found that it worked like interestingly well without any examples. And then if I click show more, I can just keep generating names. And then what I did for the classification task was I just said, give me 100 of these examples, and I downloaded them as a CSV, basically. There we go. And then this is the CSV that I used that I then went and labeled and then classified. So you can see how I'm both generating the data and organizing and kind of labeling the data in Elicit. Right now, we've intentionally kind of made them somewhat disparate tasks, but at various points in time have experimented with having that whole workflow live in the app as well, and eventually expect to have the whole workflow live in the app.
Yeah,
That's
so
wow.
over time, we expect that people will just execute these kind of higher level actions like brainstorm, classify. And so as you move up the ladder of abstraction, you become more capable as a researcher, or you can do more in much less time.
Mm-hmm.
That's so exciting. So I have a question, minor one about the generation of names. Like, does it come up with fake scientists? Did you see that?
Yeah,
Go ahead, Andreas.
I mean, I think that's a great question that we could say a lot about. So I think it depends on it kind of depends on the question you ask and like how much it's answerable using kind of fairly general world knowledge or like, things you find in a web crawl data set, which in this case, I think probably most or all of the names are going to be real. But I think suppose you start a list and you add some names that the model doesn't know, then it won't know that those are names it doesn't know, as opposed to that it should make up names that are made up. And so like one of the interesting directions that, or like one of the other examples of composition that we like a lot is thinking about combining generation with info retrieval. So I brainstorm my list of names, and then for each of those, I want to run a quick Google search to check, is this a real person, or what kind of person is that? And then throw out all the ones that are not real. I think is an interesting direction.
That's so awesome. Jungwon, did you want to add something, or?
No, I was just going to say, in my personal experience playing around with this, it's generally, I've usually found it to generate real names, but often it makes up organizations. So that's kind of like cooperation of international, like blah, blah, blah stuff. It's like not real. Yeah.
Maybe we should start that organization.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're just not real yet,
Yeah.
Yeah. So can I use it to write my whole thesis?
It depends on how good you want your thesis to be, I think. But we are kind of interested in like trying to really, this is why it's really important to us to work very closely with real researchers and users and make sure it's actually useful. Because I think these language models are still largely in a bit of a novelty or toy state. And getting them to be supportive for knowledge workers, especially people who have such deep expertise, is quite a big challenge. And we do want to think about where do people get stuck trying to use this for a research project end to end. So, yeah.
That's great. Yeah. So I guess, one other question is, with all these tasks being so open-ended and it's even hard for humans to evaluate them, how do you approach just, understanding how well Elicit is working on a specific task?
Yeah, I think that is a question we will struggle with for a long time, or it's like really a key question that we will never be perfect at, or will always want to get better at. But one answer is, I think evaluation is kind of itself an open-ended question. So like imagine the question like, how good is this answer that I got? Then there are many components to goodness. Like, is it on topic? Is it grammatically well-formed? Is it factually correct? Does it take into account the kinds of things I know? And you could make a very long list of criteria. And so that itself is the type of problem that you could like decompose. And over time, we expect like our tools will help with evaluation as much as they will help with the object level tasks. And there's like this kind of virtuous cycle where as your tool gets better, it also gets better at helping you evaluate how good the tool is. That's kind of the like longer term vision answer. And then I think there's like a shorter term answer for some of the particular tasks that we're running where you can be like, well, you should compare to alternatives. Like if you run this few shot classification task that Jungwon showed, then often the best alternative is you give the task to a human research assistant, you evaluate how long does it take them to do the task, how much kind of agreement is there between different people versus how much agreement is there between people and Elicit. And then I think you can get some grasp of how well you're doing.
Yeah, that's great. So I guess, one other question is, let's imagine like everyone in the media lab at MIT, like every researcher is using Elicit. What would happen like in 5 years from now or 10 years from now? How do you want the world to be different?
That's a great question. So I guess, I think we would generally want researchers to feel less like they're drowning in papers and be able to kind of go through a process where they can navigate the insane amount of content that all of us have to go through in a more structured way. So be more systematic about covering the entire space of papers, maybe breaking that down into clusters, like, different thematic clusters, kind of like I showed with classification, prioritizing it and being more being more maybe systematic about covering the whole space. It would be great to, help people find other research collaborators. That's a different use case that different research institutes have asked us about. Can we use brainstorming and classification to find people we don't know about? Right now, a lot of the collaborator discovery process is kind of like, who do I already know? Who does my advisor already know? But especially if you want to collaborate across disciplines, you might want to have a more brainstorming or kind of open-ended process for doing that. Eventually, our long-term vision is to learn from these very experienced, kind of aware and disciplined researchers what good insight discovery looks like, or what various approaches to insight discovery looks like, and then try to make that cheaper and affordable for the average person, because the average person also struggles with research questions like, can I breastfeed or can I use formula, or do I need to breastfeed my child? Or, what is the impact of this product, wearing this product on my skin every day, things like that. Those are research questions that some people can afford to dedicate years to in a PhD program to really understand the state of the art and like reconcile all the conflicting evidence. But a lot of people who need the answers to those questions don't have that time. So that's where we're really excited about how making some parts of this more affordable can really have broader impacts beyond just the research community.
That's so great. Yeah, I love that vision. So I guess one follow-up on that is, how do you make sure that there aren't like biases that are being replicated? Or maybe one other question is, given all these problems that have with the Paris paper about language models, how do you think Elicit can help maybe overcome them? Yeah, you can take it either way.
Do you want me to take that one, Andreas, or do you want?
I can start, and then you can add a few thoughts. I think that is also a hard question that we'll probably struggle with for a long time. I think it's maybe useful to think about what is the source of biases, and then one source of biases is just like more the data than the model. Like these models have like fairly, in some sense, simple architectures, and most of what they do comes from the data they're trained on. So where the data they're trained on is, in this case, like web crawl data. So like, I guess the model will reflect what's in that data. And then one way to think about like removing or changing biases is to think about, well, if you go more in the kind of personal Wikipedia type direction, where it's like, well, this model is going to be trained on like your own thinking or the type of reasoning that you endorse, or that it's like maybe trained more on kind of research data rather than like common web crawl data, or fine-tuned on particular kinds of data. That is one way of changing like what the particular biases look like. But again, I think that it's a really hard and important question.
Yeah, I think so. One thing we can do is really constrain the way we're using these tasks. So, have them, instead of just kind of using them for free form, open-ended generation or text, be very clear, like the point of this task is to help you with a research question. And all it does is, help you with research questions. Then wherever possible, try to ground it in more objective fact. So that's kind of the brainstorming plus info retrieval thing that Andreas mentioned. When you generate various research questions, try to make it easier for the researcher to also find data to support that answer, which is just helpful for them because that's what they're going to do next anyways. And then I think there are ways that Elicit can actually enable people to overcome their own existing biases. So again, like if we make it easier for them to find collaborators in different fields, one task that we haven't built yet, but a lot of researchers have asked about is like, what is this concept called in other disciplines? So like, what is this ML concept called in like behavioral economics or like, game theory or something like that. And then, some of the other tasks that people use a lot are like, are called generating failure modes or generating counter arguments. So using GPT-3 to kind of do this debate where I give an idea and then GPT-3 suggests different ways that my plan might fail or ways that my argument might break down, and making that that kind of, that type of reasoning or that interaction a lot more easily accessible to people, maybe like framing the style in a way that will land best with the researcher can, I think, actually allow Elicit to be used to like actively reduce human biases that exist today. So we definitely want to encourage it to be used more for that, more for those types of purposes.
That's great. Awesome. So I guess I have a lot of other questions, but I want to also give the audience the chance to ask questions. I know Evan also already has some questions. But before that, can MIT researchers use Elicit? What's the process to get access to it?
Yeah, if you go to elicit.org, you can sign up for an account. We're still in a closed beta, so the access will kind of be given in a more staggered way, but you're certainly welcome to sign up and get on the wait list, and then we'll try to give you access as quickly as possible.
That's great. Awesome. So I'm going to now open the floor for the audience to ask any questions that they might have. Ivan, do you want to ask your questions now?
Yep, thank you. Thank you very much for this very intriguing demonstration. So I actually wanted to ask a little bit to understand better the capabilities of the system, kind of like from the perceived needs that I often experienced. I was wondering if you were thinking about kind of covering those, or you're just interested in different things. So one of them was kind of asking vaguely defined questions. So often I have a feeling that like I have certain idea or concept, or like someone might have researched this, but I don't know how it's called. And how can I even like, then after like extensive searching, I find out, oh, okay, that was called grapheme phoneme transduction or something like that. Do you think, do you plan to address anything like that in your work?
Yeah, yeah, we're pretty interested in things in this direction. Actually, Jungwon, do you want to show the definition to name task that I made? So this isn't like a very lightweight version of the thing you described, but I often, like outside of a research context, have this. I'm in this situation where I'm like I'm trying to think of a word, and I know that there is a word for the thing that I'm trying to think of, and I'm like, ugh. What is it called again when you're, I don't know, a word is on the tip of your tongue and you don't know what it is? There must be a name for this. And so we made a task for this.
Is it this one? Define word given context?
I think it's just convert definition to word.
Okay. Do you want to give an example of one you've tried?
I think it's also interesting to try with things where you don't actually know.
I mean, I don't know. No, that's good. See?
Yeah. Or like,
yeah.
That, or try something where we don't know if there's actually a word, like that feeling of anxiousness when the audience is about to ask you questions that you might or might not know the answer to.
Great stalling, Andreas.
Stage fright. Stage fright is pretty good.
Relaxation. I feel like some of these might not be these. Like I'm not really sure if these are real words.
Yeah, sometimes it makes it.
Oh wow, that's a beautiful word. Okay, well, I learned a new word.
Well, I have to say, you know, as someone with, you know, my English is, I'm not a native speaker, and I use Elicit to come up with metaphors for different things. And I actually, like some of them, I didn't know they exist, and they were really cool.
So it could be useful to writers, I guess.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the applications we've seen take off with GPT-3.
Another thing I wanted to ask is, so often when you are doing sort of interdisciplinary research and you're trying to find this unexpected connections in some other area, what kind of faces you is like this learning curve. So you are faced with the tons of these unknown terms, and you're like, what does it even mean? And then after you research all of them and you kind of start to figure out how things are, you actually realize that it was actually really simple. It just uses this incomprehensible terminology and like a lot of specifics, because of course, people who spend a lot of time in this area, they go kind of dig down deep, but like at the base, it's very simple. So I was wondering if it includes any attempt to kind of provide this high-level overview of what the terms are, what it is all about.
I've actually, many different researchers have asked this too. And I've been pretty interested in creating a task like this, but I think if there's like a glossary somewhere of key terms in every academic discipline, it would be very easy to create a search task. You just copy it into Elicit, and then you could kind of use semantic search over that data set to find terms across all disciplines around like cooperation or whatever. But I think I'm not sure how we can get that data, but I think it would be cool to maybe talk to you separately, Ivan, about how you can create your own tasks in Elicit, because it seems like you have good ideas for tasks, and it's like pretty easy to try these out and create them quickly.
Oh, so this is possible. That's very interesting.
Yeah, it's very easy to make a new task.
I think maybe connecting this again to the personalized Wikipedia comment from earlier, I think the ideal version of this is a personalized glossary or something like, because I think I really had this problem when I tried to learn about finance, and I was like, this is all totally incomprehensible. And like fundamentally, a lot of these concepts are not like that difficult. They're just like explained in like kind of in a weird language that only finance people understand. And so if I could be like, okay, explain to me what options are in, using like math and CS type language, or, or like whatever the concepts are that I know, I think that would be extremely helpful and hopefully something we can get to in the future.
That would be beautiful. And the last question I had was, long time ago when I was in Georgia Tech, I worked a little bit with Professor Ashok Goel, and his work was at the time trying to find analogies between engineering systems and biology, so that you can like type a request and find biological systems which function in a way similar to your engineering systems that you want to design. So to kind of automate by inspired design in this way. I was wondering if such capability could also is also something that the system will be capable of one day. So I was just curious about that.
I mean, it's hard to make predictions about what it's going to be capable of one day. I think it's definitely like in the direction of things we're excited about. So where the specific thing is like taking all the like fairly unstructured text on the internet and like extracting more structured information or making it like more accessible. We started doing some extremely simple work on this, just converting, like taking papers and like extracting captions and things like that. But I think the long run vision is, you have all these papers and they mention like different kinds of analogies and have like different results and recommendations, and you kind of extract and you extract like the more conceptual information and make it accessible through search, or like make it accessible for other tasks like find analogies.
Yep.
Thanks, Ivan, for the questions, and thanks, Andreas and Jungwon. We have more questions from the audience.
Thank you very much.
Do you want to go next?
Oh, yeah. Is it my hand?
Yeah,
I see more hands. Oh, okay, cool. Hi, thanks for sort of the demo or the presentation. My question was, and I jumped in sort of 5 minutes later after the start, so please tell me if this is something you already discussed. But on the back end, is it mostly sort of prompt engineering that you do on GPT-3, or is there also some like fine tuning of the model, or I don't know, some reinforcement learning, trying to optimize on some reward of what people would like to see if they do this task, or is that all sort of a future directions you're exploring?
Yeah, right now it's mostly prompt engineering and combined with semantic search. So sometimes, you want to dynamically construct the prompt, and to do that, you want to do semantic search over, for example, training examples. We have started working on fine tuning. We think probably in the future, fine tuning will play a pretty important role. Especially if the more we want models to kind of get better as you use them and like adapt to you as an Elicit user, the more I think fine tuning will be really important.
Oh, but then you need access to sort of, is it that kind of access that GPT-3 provides, or do they just provide, you give a prompt and they give you an answer?
They're kind of work in progress fine-tuning APIs, but both from OpenAI and others.
Cool. Thanks.
Thank you. Georgie, do you want to ask your question next?
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much for your presentation. It's actually so impressive to see how it works. I wish it was available to me right now. Actually, they're kind of nice. I want to shadow the Asma's question about bias. The one thing is really common in, I think, AI research that I witnessed is that it's been already researched and discussed that for example, in ML research, most of it centers around like United States as one large hub of research. Another one would be like Western Europe. And so it's not hard to imagine that a model like GPT-3 that collects like large swaths of text on the internet, like learns and centers around these kind of clusters of research. So my question was, do you think that right now or in the future, Elicit will be able to provide the same kind of help to international researchers from other places, or to kind of also add on to that, would there maybe in the future be possibility of using different language? Let's say the researchers from Russia or researchers from Manila, like, and this will, if the goal is kind of to look for the really good collaboration, I think the international perspective will also be like super important. Yeah, so this is just my question, like guys, thank you so much again for your presentation. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that. Actually, I was just working with a researcher who created a task in Elicit to translate, to see how well GPT-3 could translate local Ghanaian languages. Because a lot of he didn't have the compute required to kind of run a transformer. And with Elicit, he could very quickly use few-shot learning to kind of see how well it might take on that translation task. So we're definitely pretty excited to work with researchers much more globally and make sure their perspectives and their data sets and use cases are represented in the product as well.
Actually, this prompts one interesting idea, which is kind of analogies across languages. So similar to analogies across fields, it would be cool if you're like, here's this concept in German or whatever that you might not be familiar with, and then here's the like English version of it. So that's another way that like if you did train on, I mean, I guess it does have like some, I guess it's like, it's okay for German, and then it's probably worse for some other languages, but the more it's like expansive, I think the more it can help kind of import ideas from other cultures as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one task we created for an organization we're working with is searches over a glossary that a person at this think tank made. It has like over 10,000 terms relevant to tech policy in Chinese. And so you can search over this data set in Pinyin or in traditional characters or in English. And I think it's just really awesome that you can use any kind of language interface to then get to the core concepts of these important concepts and search over text like that. And so I felt really excited when I saw that like language was less of a barrier to me now than before.
Wow, that's really impressive. Thank you so much for that.
Hey guys, I can't raise my hand because I'm also a co-host, but I'd love to ask a question. And what I'm curious about is, I think what a lot of people here are curious about is some of the technical details behind how you're doing this. Would you call this that you're software engineering on top of GPT-3, or are there some things, for example, that Andres, that you've done in your research career that you're adding in here? Or like, I guess I'm curious, like, what are the kind of technical contributions that you're doing to do this pipeline? And maybe like as a way to kind of like make this concrete, thinking about that question that Jungwon showed us about cognitive reframing, and basically someone like mad about their boss, someone like feeling like they're a failure, and then there's all these ways to take another perspective. Maybe if you could walk us through like, what are the technical details to make a like cognitive reframing happen?
Yeah, to first say something like kind of give a slightly more general answer to your question, and then we can think about the details. I think our perspective is language model APIs will basically become commodities. So you have these APIs where you're like, well, I can give it a text and then I can get a completion of this text predicted. And that is useful, but it's not like you generally, the thing you want to do is not text prediction. You don't want to do something else, right? You want to do like, I want to solve this classification task or this reframe task. So there's like something, there's like some infrastructure to be built on top of that basic API to make those tasks happen. Where one analogy is something like, AWS provides raw compute, and then Heroku provides, ways for you to like actually like run and host websites, and it's like a layer on top. So we often think of ourselves as the layer on top of these APIs. That's the general answer. Then for the reframe task, I think that one is actually like fairly simple in that most of what we provide is for people. Actually, Jungwon could show the version of the app where you make new tasks. Like most of what we provide is just a way for people to create like training sets and test sets. So you make like a very small training set of examples of kind of positive reframes, and then Illicit helps you to figure out, like, are these enough? Do I need to give more examples by telling you, okay, here are the predictions on the test set. Here's like the perplexity of the test set. And so it kind of helps you iterate and quickly like build the task that you want, and then constructs the prompt for you. So it's like, but it's a fairly small contribution on top of the API. But for other tasks like classifications, the gap is much larger between the kind of the basic text prediction function and what you want to make the task happen.
Would you say that this is kind of like a human in the loop approach, where you essentially have this transformer, someone has a task, they provide some kind of labeled data, and then essentially they evaluate the outputs and say, yeah, this is good, this is bad. And then as they iterate through that, you kind of have this active learning model that hopefully produces something awesome. Is that kind of a good way to encapsulate it?
Yeah, I think it's a very simple version of that. I think like we're extremely excited about active learning in general. I think active learning makes a lot of sense in this setting because the model can ask people such rich questions. Like you could be like, usually with active learning, you just select which examples to give the user to label. But I think with language models, you can ask much richer questions like, here's this slightly transformed version of your example. Is this also still within scope or out of scope? Or like the model can actually like rewrite or generate questions for you. So I think like making this loop between like human feedback, integrating human feedback into updating the model, and then asking new questions work really well, I think will be pretty important for us in the future.
Sounds great. Thanks, Matt, for the question. So I guess I want to give Illicit a little bit of credit because it gave me a question that was quite out of the box. It asked me, do you see any potential useful analogies in computer vision world?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think maybe the main thing I would think about there is that in computer vision, like end-to-end approaches have really won over kind of feature engineering and manually built pipelines. And so we could ask, what does that mean for Illicit? And I think one thing it could mean that increasingly kind of more of the kind of little task steps get folded into the model. And then more of the work that people need to do is on the evaluation side, like really telling, are these results good or not? Generating good feedback signals, pushing the model away like from say biased answers towards more helpful answers. And less of it is in kind of the actual execution of the tasks happening in a very fine-grained way. So that would be one thing one could take away from lessons learned from the vision world.
Yeah, and I think people are pretty excited about the multimodal capabilities of these models. Like DALL-E was pretty cool. So maybe there's some way that you can kind of generate large amounts of images via language or very specific variations of images via language, or just kind of, again, blurring the line between text and image could be something really exciting, an exciting research direction.
That's so cool. Yeah. So we have 5 more minutes. I just want to make sure if there are any other questions from the audience. If you do, please feel free to either raise your hand or put it in the chat. Otherwise, I'm going to ask you another question in the meantime. So I think, like, are there any particular tasks that Illicit might not be good at, or generative language models at this point more generally not be so good at, and you think they might get better in the future or they might not?
Yeah, generally things that kind of end up being more very, very technical, it struggles with. So like, more closed form reasoning, mathematical reasoning. Again, a lot of exciting research progress happening here, but it's like, it's not as good at math as it is at speaking in a complete sentence. And then I think one of the ways we think about the kind of research progress we need to make on Illicit is it's like a generalist reasoner. And research is a very specialized discipline. So thinking about how it's helpful for brainstorming research questions at a high level, but if you already have 20 years of expertise in the discipline, these questions are maybe too abstract for you. So thinking about how we get it to really understand technical concepts and be useful for a professor is definitely one thing an important part of the progress we need to make.
That sounds great. Thank you. So are there any other things that we didn't cover that you want to mention before we run out of time?
I don't think so. We're very excited. I mean, yeah, it seems like a lot of people are interested in signing up for the beta version, giving feedback, maybe creating tasks. We have a pretty rich community of researchers who are excited about running research projects using Elicit or adjacent to Elicit or like about Elicit and like creating tasks for themselves. Ultimately, we want to foster this community of researchers that can kind of channel these AI systems to make their work and increase their make their work better and increase their productivity, and then share that, you know, either within a lab or within a community or within an academic discipline. So we're really excited about how easy it is to create a new task and then like make that shareable. In the future, it would be great if I could like run the Andreas model on every decision that I had to make, or just anticipate the questions that he would ask me, and be able to do that for many different types of people. So this process of making reasoning explicit and shareable and compositional is something that's very exciting to us and a core part of our mission. We'd love to have your help either by studying you as researchers or having you kind of contributing directly to the app itself.